Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Influential Oregonian, where we have discussions on Oregon history and academics and interview important people who have made history within or in the name of the Beaver State. I'm your host, Marcus Axford, from the show Welcome to Oregon and running on 4 hours of sleep, joined by my boon companions, archaeologist David Winkler and Finn J.D. John of Offbeat Oregon. Gentlemen, welcome.
Hello, Marcus.
Great to be here.
Yes, it is. And our guest today is an incredible woman. She is a historian, business owner of Moreland Resource Consulting, president of the Oregon Black Pioneers, and just way too many other titles. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to welcome Kimberly Moreland to the show. Hello, Kimberly.
Hello, everyone. Nice to be here.
Yay. All right. So before we get into the formal interview, network updates. So this is where I stall out. Right at the top of the show, as per usual. So I've been a little behind on things. And I've decided recently that I'm going to try to kind of do one major thing a week. Like, I need to do the book for Welcome to Oregon. I need to do the website. I need to do the store. I need to do. I've just got this big backlog, and
But launching the podcast is kind of that's worth a couple of weeks worth of stuff. I mean, this is what? No, this is episode 3, right?
yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm excited that we have actually had the ambition to make this consistent. I'm always afraid that somebody's gonna be like, "No, I'm bored. I don't want to do it anymore." So, yeah, plus I have another project coming up that Finn, you and I talked, well, actually we talked about in chat together, where I've been wanting, because we talked about how YouTube is kind of the better place to be present versus podcast. Not that we would ever stray away from podcasts because we are a podcast network,
But it's a
but
great place for outreach
yes,
because it's a search engine as opposed to just a, content delivery service.
right. So I want to put Welcome to Oregon on there. And originally, when I had the idea, I thought I wanted to do like maybe picture slideshow because I didn't really know how I was going to do it with attaching audio to video. And then I got to thinking, we got to talking, and I thought, wait a minute, what if? Because remastering has also been in my brain too, now that I'm coming up on 50 episodes, which is weird to think about. So I had the idea of live recording from episode 1 onto YouTube, me on camera, just raw, unedited, um, just going through the entire script. So that way it's kind of sort of getting remastered. It's on YouTube on video, and I thought it'd be kind of fun as a kind of sort of personal touch kind of thing. So that's my plan. I want to start doing it next month as sort of a it's been 2 years. Now we're going to kind of kick off this whole other new project. So, and like I said, I have a bunch of other stuff that I've got to do. So, uh, on in between weeks, I figured, okay, I don't have a script to write because I have this horrible habit of of writing a 8 to 10 page script last minute. I did this last script in 3 days because I'm a terrible person. So yeah. And the as far as this show goes, the list of guests that is getting compiled is kind of a lot. So, Finn, David, I talked to you in chat about maybe we'll see. Like, I still would love to do like break episodes where we just have the three of us, but I don't know if we're gonna run out of guests anytime soon. Because I'm thinking we've got museums and
Well, maybe if we run out of guests, maybe some of our former guests will want to come back with updates and stuff.
and that's another thing that I'm so excited about. So keep that in mind, Kimberly. We'll be knocking on your door again.
I'll give you some other suggestions.
Right
Yay.
on.
Yeah, and that's just it. Yeah, feel free to be like, you know what? I liked being on your show. I think you should talk to this person. Um, So I always love getting recommendations. So,
Will
which by
do.
the way, wait, what?
I said, will do.
Yes, excellent. I was going to say quick shout out to Bruce Haney, author of several books. I've
Boring
uh,
Oregon.
yes,
He's
yes,
the boring historian. Yes.
yeah.
Yeah, that book was that boring book. I think that was his first book, and it was great. He had the story in it about Free Coldwell, the bad Leroy Brown character that the town teamed up and hired a professional boxer to humiliate him because he was being such a pest in the taverns.
Hmm.
For
The
people not in the know,
good
Boring is
old
the name
days.
of a town here in
Oh.
Oregon.
Oh,
We're not
thank you,
talking about
David.
this boring man and his boring book.
Oh, trust me, I
Uh,
plan to give Bruce a hard time. So you're a boring historian. No, no, no. I'm the boring historian. Well, I mean, that's kind of, egotistical to you to presume that
oh,
you're the boring historian.
Who's on first?
I think he leans into that though, because it's just kind of fun. And of course, the town is paired with a town called Dull in Scotland, and they can't call them sister cities because apparently that's copyrighted or something.
Oh, really? Oh, how interesting.
Yeah.
But
I've
yeah,
got it. First cousin cities.
first. But yeah, quick shout out to him because I kind of sort of forgot. Shamefully to admit this, I've been so flustered the past couple weeks with just so much. I mean, we're growing, we're getting bigger, and we can't stress this enough. We all have daytime jobs that we can't necessarily focus on this full time. I really wish we could. So he's like, "So are we good to go for this weekend?" Bruce, I'm really glad we're friends because you're gonna murder me.
Well, next weekend, I guess, right?
Well, that's Peter Dibble, so I told him we'll
Oh,
get you the weekend after. But
got it.
uh,
Okay, cool.
uh, I don't feel so bad because we did advertise his new book, Dirt Babies, for him, which is a book on how arts and crafts come alive from the grave of a murderer. It sounds very interesting. And I asked him about how's the book going. He's like, well, it's a little slow. And I said, well, I really hope that our advertisement helped. I did it through the end of April, and he's like, well, funny you should mention that. I have seen an uptick in book sales on my other books.
Right
So
on.
it would be really amazing if we were involved in that. That's one of my goals is to get more well known so we can prop up other people, the old proverb of, was it high tide lifts all boats kind of thing. So, and yeah,
Right
speaking
on.
of the newest episode of Welcome to Oregon, I recorded that this morning. It was very
Yay.
difficult because I have stuff going on with my mouth because I got really dry trying to talk. And every 5 seconds, I'm like, dang it, I have to pause, cut it, re-record, stumble again. It was just so frustrating this morning. So,
All
yeah.
right.
All right, David, anything interesting in the archaeological field or with you this week?
Yes, so I have some confirmed dates on Salem's public archaeology project. At the end of this month, we're going to start excavating. This is through Kimberly Fitzgerald and City of Salem. I've been very fortunate to be able to work with Kimberly over the last 3 years. I refer to myself as one of her strays because I just kind of rolled up to her lab one day. But it's a continuation of her research into the Methodist boarding school, which was called the Indian Manual Labor Training School, that was set up by Jason Lee. We're
Mm.
chasing down a lot of those old Methodist sites and really trying to tell the full story, which is the slogan of this project. Because a lot happened that just got purposefully forgotten. And we're trying to kind of bring that up to the surface so we can now deal with it together as a community. So we're going to have a public day where anyone from the public can drop by, ask questions. There's going to be professional archaeologists walking around to do that. Unfortunately, you can't dig, and you can't get too close to the pits. But it's a cool event, and it's been pretty successful in years past.
Yeah, that's the one you invited me to uh um I don't know if collaborate's the right word, but come get in touch with the people we need to get in touch with, if I remember correctly.
Yes. Yes. Kimberly's always been a great resource. You know, she's a one-woman department, so she doesn't have a lot of time. But she is extremely generous with the time that she does have.
Excellent. What day was that?
So I don't have a public day yet.
Okay.
Um, but I will definitely drop that once I have it.
Perfect. Perfect. Excellent.
Kimberly and I were coworkers at one time. She's a dear friend. Yeah. Yeah,
No
Wow, that's
she's
kidding.
pretty
awesome.
amazing. Pretty amazing.
Yeah. Where
Yeah.
was that? So were
At
you with
the
City of
city,
Salem?
I was an urban planner,
That's
and we
right.
actually, our office was right next to each other. And
That's awesome because
yeah,
her background is in urban planning, so it makes sense that your paths would have crossed at some point.
yeah, yeah.
Remember what
And
we
yeah,
said
she
about
was amazing.
Hmm.
remember what we said about Pacific Northwest being a small town?
Yes, the
Yes.
Pacific Northwest is one big small town.
Alrighty. Was that all, David?
That was all I had. Thank you.
Perfect. Finn?
And I really don't have much of anything. I'm just sort of doing the same stuff that I was doing last week, only trying to get it done right this time. And I mean, we're already a little ways into the show, so I want to yield my time to Kimberly, since I just kind of don't have much to report.
No, that
Besides
sounds
getting a
good.
tighter curl on the mustache.
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah, it was
releasing.
a rush job this morning, I'm afraid. You know, I tuned in like 5 minutes before showtime. I was like, okay, guys, I'm here.
I was this close to calling you on the phone, like, hey, are you awake?
Yep.
Yeah, no. As always, Penny Dreadful Story Hour, amazing, amazing show. Obviously, Offbeat Oregon as well, but so look forward every week to those episodes. I get so excited.
I
Your
might
rendition,
actually crack those in half because they're starting to get really long. But anyway, we'll see.
no, your rendition of Sweeney Todd is just great. It just paints a picture.
You should hear him sing The Worst Pies in London.
We're getting photobombed.
Finn, Finn
This
starts
is
doing the musical
Rusty.
version. Oh, hi, buddy.
Uh, yeah,
Alrighty.
you go lay down, Rusty. Good boy.
Well, Kimberly, it sounds like the floor is yours. So, oh my, where do we begin? With the obvious question, which has been answered a couple times before, but not officially on recording. So, are you a native Oregonian? And if not, where did your journey begin and how did it lead you here?
First, I want to say this is my first time on a podcast, so I'm really excited to be
Yay!
Yay!
here. And I just joined Accelerated Media, which is a podcast, the board of a nonprofit podcast.
Oh,
So podcast must be in my future. But I do want to say that I'm originally from Ohio, and I came to Oregon in 1987, right after getting married. In fact, I was married on September 5th, 1987, and moved to Oregon 3 days later, and then went on my honeymoon in Vancouver, BC. But but I always loved historic preservation, and a lot of that did start in Ohio. I lived, Cleveland is an industrial town. I grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I used to love to take photos of historic buildings in downtown Cleveland, and one of my assignments in college was to look at the history of Cleveland, um, and I went to the University of Cincinnati and majored in urban studies. And eventually, when I moved to Oregon, I um, originally enrolled in a PhD program in public administration at PSU, but for various reasons, I decided to get a master's in urban studies, urban planning instead. And that led me to the work that I do today. Yeah.
And what is I mentioned a couple of your the titles before. Um you are African American, which is
Mhm.
why we're sitting down here and talking about this. And you are, in fact, the president. There's one source I looked up that said you're the vice president, but you are, in fact, the president of the Oregon Black Pioneers, correct?
Yes, I'm the president of Oregon Black Pioneers for the last, I think, 4 years. I've been when I was working for the city of Salem, where I met Kimberly, I was introduced to the Oregon Black Pioneers because they were founded and headquartered in the city of Salem. And and that was back in like 2007. So I've been involved with the Oregon Black Pioneers since 2007. And I served in many roles as secretary, as um, vice president, and eventually the president. Um, the Oregon Black Pioneers was founded by a group of people, including the late Senator Jackie Winter, who have recently moved, and others who have recently moved to Oregon and was working in Salem and was wondering why there wasn't a lot of Black history in the schools. And so later, Willie B. Richardson joined the group, and they started to interpret the history of Oregon. And in the like local libraries, they had exhibits, um, and the organization grew, and then they published a publication about blacks in Million and Polk County, called Perseverance. And then I joined the group, and I had a lot of background in Portland Black history, and I published a book called The History of African Americans in Portland. It was Arcadia book publication,
Oh,
and
yeah.
and all the funding goes towards the Oregon Black Pioneers. And I was back in 2013. And so, yeah, it's been a really fun journey. Um, and now we went from an all volunteer to having 3 staff. I'm really happy about that. And so my role as interpreting the Black history on behalf of the Oregon Black Pioneers is kind of taking I'm a backseat as our staff, talented and gifted staff, take the lead, and they're doing amazing things around the state.
That's incredible. Yeah. I made the decision to make the latest episode of Welcome to Oregon, my second round of Black History. And I looked back at my first one and I'm like, man, I could have done better. So I was really excited to have a stronger narrative this time around. And my global body was about Martin Luther King and how, he's not when we think of him, we think of this basically majestic person who is very, clean and proper. And then you look at his childhood, and it's filled with a lot of interesting details. Not to get into the weeds of it, especially since you can just go listen to the episode, but he tried committing suicide a couple times for a couple different reasons based on guilt. When he thought he was guilty for feeling like that he had killed his sister, which she wasn't. She just got knocked unconscious by their brother. And then again, when his grandmother passed away, the day he snuck out of home to go see a parade, and he felt very guilty and felt like God was punishing him. And his father reassured him that no, it was just her time to go. And he also had a very distinct hate for white people because of the way, him and his family were treated. And then when starts going to college, he goes up to Connecticut to work on a tobacco farm for the summer to earn money, and he finds out that up north, there's none of that. He said he wrote to his family saying, it's so different here. And I speculate that, I wonder if that was a turning point for him that made him think, maybe there's hope. Maybe like I've just been living
Mhm.
in this bubble and not the rest of the world isn't like this. And I connected it with a lot of Oregon Black pioneers who kind of also found themselves in the same boat where they're coming from back east and in Oregon, regardless of, because, people like, how could there be Black history when you have Black exclusion laws on the books? And many times they weren't really enforced, and quite often, actually, they found themselves having their white neighbors actually really enjoy having their company. They vouched for them. They petitioned for them to basically be left alone. And there's many, many of these amazing Black historical figures that I was really excited to write about that worked hard to earn the that respect and reputation. It was really an honor to write and research about.
Well, it's always an underdog story is the thing, is there was so much systemic, I mean, intrinsic and extrinsic racism where we're lucky enough now that we mostly just have intrinsic racism to worry about. But, back then it was perfectly considered perfectly legitimate to be a flaming racist. And so everybody who did these amazing things did it against a really strong social headwind. I mean, stories like Letitia Carson, who must have been just an
Mhm.
incredible person. Um, and Lewis
Yeah.
Southworth.
Mhm.
Who's
So
that?
many,
Yeah.
so many. It's amazing how they survived in that backdrop, you know. And you're right, Marcus. It sometimes with the help of their white neighbors, and those who were sympathetic to African Americans and the challenges of living in this, you know, new territory and when it became a state. Um, and so it's some amazing stories that what I loved about Oregon Black Pioneers is that we didn't really focus a lot on the hardship as much as we focused on the perseverance and how they were able to persevere and raise their families, pursue their dreams, educate their children, despite some really troubling times. But it's just been amazing to learn about these stories from before Oregon became a state to the present, and all the amazing things that are happening today in our community to kind of repair some of the damage that was done, to Black communities in Oregon. But yeah, but we definitely owe it to our Black pioneers because they had to shoulder a lot of harsh realities and that's why one of my dreams is to have a monument of the names of all the enslaved Africans who came across the Oregon Trail, because uh, there was quite a few, and who uh, names. Sometimes you don't know their last names, but you know their first name, and just to acknowledge them because without them, we wouldn't have the communities that we have now. And their contributions are varied and wide. They're throughout the state of Oregon. A lot of it starting in the Mid-Willamette Valley. You had entrepreneurs. You had like Lewis Southwest. You had those who came during the gold mining who lived in Jacksonville. And in fact, Zachary Stocks, the executive director of Oregon Black Pioneers, always reminds us that Jacksonville probably was the first Black community in Oregon during those gold mining era. And they have walking tours that take you to those communities. And but it was just a interesting time because it's a community in Jacksonville called Kanaka Flats, which was a name they used for Hawaiian. And so you had a large group of Hawaiians and Blacks and Chinese that all lived in Jacksonville. And so it's just, Oregon has a rich history, American history, um, that's sometimes not fully told, just from one perspective.
Yeah, there's a lot of selective storytelling. But the thing about Black history that's interesting to me, same with like Native American history and even the history of white women back then who wanted to do something other than home make is, I mean, it's fine. I mean, anybody can be a poker playing superstar if you get dealt a straight flush. All you have to do is lay the cards down and
Mm-hmm.
rake in the money. But if you get dealt a pair of deuces or something like that and play those out and win the table, that's a big deal. It's the underdog stories for my money that are really interesting, and also the suppression stories, like the way that the jazz scene in North Portland was suppressed after the Second World War because the city fathers were like, "Oh no, we can't have that," and and the Dude Ranch goes
Yeah.
is basically shut out of business, and the fact that lots and lots of cowboys were black people. We don't
Mm-hmm.
really
Yeah.
hear about that these days because
And George Fletcher, one of my famous, I love that story of how he had won the second Pendleton Roundup, but the judges didn't want to honor his
that's
success,
right.
so the
And he
crowd got really angry, and this is a white crowd, so the sheriff took his hat, took off George Fletcher's hat, tore it in pieces, and sold it, and then the money that he got from his hat was more than he would have gotten if he had won the prize.
That's
So, and
cool.
that's a beautiful story and a contemporary story because his family, he was relatively young, and uh, still, I think his family still lives around the area, but yeah, there's some really cool stories and intentionally suppression. But then you have, a lot of other things, that kind of suppress the jazz scene too with the highway construction,
yeah.
which took away a lot of some of the cool jazz clubs that was, located in like Lowell Williams area. Then you have Memorial Coliseum that took away you know, client base for a lot of black businesses along Williams Avenue. And then you also had Emmanuel Hospital, the expansion of the hospital that also was kind of a nail in the coffin for a lot of black businesses. And there was so much done to that area from the placement of a median along MLK that,
Mhm.
you know, diverted
Oh,
traffic away
slum
from,
clearance.
yeah, and or Negro removal, as sometimes it was called.
Oh, good old
But yeah,
Robert
so you have
Moses.
all those, you know, policing
Yeah.
tools, that, you know, but
Um,
yeah,
Do,
but it survived though. But you have some wonderful programs happening now to reconnect that area. So that's pretty amazing.
yeah, Kimberly, do you have a favorite story?
You
I was gonna
know,
ask that. Yeah.
it,
I've been
Good one,
wanting
good one.
we've been wanting to ask that for like, yeah.
the one that I wrote about recently, I was part of a group who was uh, uh, trying to identify additional historic places significant to Portland's history in the lower Albina area. It was called the Albina Preservation Initiative. And we came across this beautiful home that was owned by uh, Mary E. Fully Love and her husband, James Nathaniel Fully Love. And the more I, start to research this family, it just blew my mind how amazing this couple was because they bought the land in 1901, but a structure wasn't built until like 1907, and so they commissioned the construction of this home, and it's just still standing in the King neighborhood and just a gorgeous bungalow. And as I started to look into their family history, her husband was the president of the Afro American League. He had taken over the leadership of it that was from the founder, I think it's W.D. Griffin, who was the founder of the first black newspaper called The New Age. And he had started the African American uh, Council, but he left Oregon, and then James Fully Love became the president of the African American League. And this is the same group of people who helped the Black people who came to Oregon to work in in the timber, but when they got there, they would they was lied to about how much they were going to get paid, and so they wanted to go back home. And I believe this took place in Venosia, and near Seaside. I went to Seaside the other day and realized, oh, there go, that's a sign to Venosia. That's where this black lumber community
Oh,
was.
is that
And so,
Vernonia?
Vernonia,
yeah,
yeah, yeah.
Venosia, thank
Huh.
you. Yeah, thank you. And so so he had helped us, no, he had helped this group of black families go back home because they was kind of like, how when you pass the Union line, what you call them scabs or something like that.
Hmm.
And, and uh, so her husband was, um, help those families. And he also drafted the first public accommodation law in 1919. And then she was a suffrage leader. She was um, a founder of the first Black woman Christian Temperance Union. And if you know, temperance union with those women who was trying to stop the sale of alcohol or even created some dry towns, and they were very beautiful women. And she was she spoke at a lot of the local state conferences, but she also was the founder of the Lucy Sherman Temperance Union that was named after a national Black leader in that movement. And so they would have meetings in her house. And I mean, it's just amazing. Then her son was a protege. He was a singer at a very young age, at the local theaters. And he also was a mascot for a hockey team, and all of this is documented. And that's why I say, we were talking earlier how difficult it is to document the history, but sometimes it's there. You just got to dig deep to find it. It's in the newspaper accounts, both in the Black press and the mainstream, you know. And as you know, now we have like genealogy at our fingertips, ancestry.com and all these other uh, search tools are allowing us to really find out information about these Black pioneers and pioneers in general. Because her husband came here in 1885, and then she came later in 1888 when they got married, and so it was that was one of my favorite because she reminded me a lot of myself because I'm very kind of my faith is a big part of my life, and she kind of changed course later in her life, like I did, became an entrepreneur at later stage in my life, and but she kind of dropped off the scene, um, and we had a hard time finding when and where she died. But her son, Million, who grows up he drafted in World War II, but he's kind of like an announcer, and he performed for the soldiers, and he moved to California, and she followed him to California. So I found her death um, when her death records where she died in California. But it was just an amazing family, and um, and her husband. There's a really fun story about him walking, riding his bike, and I think he actually almost hit someone, and they get angry and call him the N word, but he kind of goes off, and the way that the newspaper, kind of described the story was like he was not happy about being called this, I wish I could remember the way they described the word, but it was like, just you got a glimpse of his personality that because sometimes you have these image that Black people who live in Portland with, so humble. They just, you know, dealt with what was given to him. But no, he was not happy about, being called the N word, and the way that the article was written, that they supported him in that. It was like, that was wrong. You didn't have to go there, but it was, but he was, he he was a very interesting person and a fighter. Even when President Roosevelt was trying to uh, discharge a lot of the black troops, him and several other black leaders spoke out against that. And so, yeah, I think that's my favorite family because it's you can write a book about them,
Yeah.
and how much they contribute to um, Oregon Black community.
That's amazing. I do have a personal question. It might be a little sensitive, so if you don't want to answer, that's perfectly fine. And
Mhm.
then I'll let David speak because he's been over in the quiet corner there, all quiet like, and I know he's got quite a bit of burning questions there as well. Um, uh, you first off, as people listening to you might deduce, you have you're hearing impaired, correct?
Uh, you say that again?
Uh, uh, as listeners or viewers, whichever, might deduce, you are hearing impaired, correct?
Yes,
Yes.
yes,
I think we just confirmed that.
yes, we do. That's
What?
fine. Okay.
But my so along with that, of course, because that has to be a challenge as well. As a black person, would you like to take the opportunity to maybe share any discrimination challenges you've had to face in your life?
Oh, yeah. I think this is a great opportunity. It had really kind of impacted, my confidence, I just, praise God for allowing me to have these experiences despite being hearing impaired, and speech impaired too, because I was in speech therapy for a long time, and it wasn't till I got asked to go back to speech therapy in the 12th grade, um, and that's when I decided to wear hearing aids because she had them. She looked normal, you know, because in elementary, the only person I knew had hearing aids had this big box and a string,
Right, right.
but yeah, but over the course of the years, I did have like self doubts about being successful, you know, while being hearing impaired and speech impaired. But what and like I had, just amazing opportunities, both in public speaking and just my writing. Because sometimes your writing suffer too because you can't write what you don't hear. So
Oh, that's
you're,
interesting.
when you're missing the S's or the EDs and I have a high pitch hearing loss, so I'm gonna miss some THCs and stuff like that. And so, but you learn to compensate for that. You have my first article. I had a professional editor, and then you take advantage of the resources. I didn't. Well, I don't know why I'm so dumb, really, not to take advantage of the resources in college if you do suffer with this, or at any level, if there's like note takers or recordings. And today, when we have like Zooms and transcripts, and it makes it so easy. I mean, we are really in a good place that I often use, like when I was on the Historic Landmark Commission. I recently decided not to renew my 4-year term, but I would take advantage of the transcripts, you know, because then, like you said, reading lips, and it's sometimes kind of, you you develop these natural habits of reading lips. I never did sign language because I have perfect low tones, which is um, high pitch deafness. So I didn't really have to do sign language, yeah. So yeah, it's a journey for those who are not what you call able considered, and uh, it's a indivisible disability that
Right, right.
and yeah. So anyway, it can be a challenge
And
Yeah.
your have you? I mean, I'm sure you have, but um, have you? What's been your experience with discrimination?
I remember as an urban planner, there's a lot of public speaking, talking to the city council, trying to convince, city councilors about, different projects and proposals and planning. And one of my supervisors said, "Do you think they're going to be able to understand what you're saying?" Or, so, and I do think that, you know, it's not blatant discrimination, but it's more of a barrier sometimes
Well,
where you,
I was meaning, as a black person, racial discrimination.
oh,
Um,
uh,
Which no, trust me, that's still valuable information. The ableism, that's still very much a real thing, and it's important to document that as well. So absolutely, thank you for your perspective on that. But again, I know it's a sensitive question,
yeah,
but I would very much like to um, hear your experiences,
yeah,
if
you
any.
know, it it happened. I'm trying to say it's not like a one incident. It's just a being black in Oregon. Sometimes you feel like you're always a suspect. Even an old woman at my age, I go into to the store and you just feel like someone's watching you, or they think you're stealing, or it's just this. You don't have that freedom to just be. You know, you always you're always on edge. And I recently went to this wonderful conference called Reimagining Public Safety. And one of the questions, we had an amazing exercise where they just asked questions. They asked you to ask a question. And one of them was, what does, what the main question was, what would Oregon be like if they loved Black people? And so you start to think, and so you get a lot of, one of the questions I asked was, what would Oregon feel like? What would Oregon's built environment be like if they loved Black people? You know, what would our children and, how would our children respond in school if Oregon loved Black people? And it's an interesting question, and this exercises that they ask you the question, and you guys might have participated in one of these before, but there's someone in the middle of the room, the facilitating this this conversation, but it's not a dialogue. It's just questions, and you just respond with the question with questions about. But it's all focused on what would Oregon be like if they loved Black people, and and I and a lot of it was like you would have this sense of freedom that you wouldn't be afraid of the police. You wouldn't be afraid of. You wouldn't have to always advocate for your child's education. You could just you could be confident that your child is being uh, you know provided quality education based on their ability and not the color of their skin. So I hope that makes sense, but it's not. I'm, there have been incidents that uh, like buying a house. My husband and I. Oh my goodness. To buy our first home and it only cost 57.5. Uh, we had to eventually we had did everything they asked, all get the credit in order. Uh, we worked with the community lender. We had to eventually go down to Key Bank headquarters at Montgomery Park to go to the person, the what you call the underwriter, to get their approval so we can move in. Again, it was a sympathetic white couple who wanted to sell us the house. We were a small growing family, and they couldn't give us the keys until they knew that it was finally closed. And and a lot of that too. The area was right at the brink of gentrification. They really didn't want to sell it to a black family. I don't think, that's just my vote. And home ownership is the beginning of wealth creation. And so it was tough to get that to to get a loan. And I had white friends who could just go in and they didn't have to go through this struggle and challenge of buying a $57,000 home, you know.
Yeah, it's weird
So
to
yeah.
think about how recently that stuff was still like literally redlining happening.
Mhm.
I went to high school at Central Catholic in Portland, which is pretty close to the same neighborhood as Albina area, and people could not get mortgages there. The banks were
No,
just, but anyway, yeah,
we
it's
recently did a study when I was working at Prosper Portland and back in 2017. Um, we wanted to look at home ownership. And most of the Black people who lived in Albina lived there prior to 2000. They had been there for many years, but all of the new homeowners were primarily white, majority white. Young Black couples was having a hard time finding homes or getting, like you said, approved for loans in the historic Albina Black community, because of gentrification.
yeah,
But
that was weird too. And they decided they were going to solve the problem by making cheap home mortgages to, the same underwriting guidelines that they were
mhm.
using before, which were, yeah, anyway, we should probably move on to more pleasant topics, I
I
suppose.
I was gonna say thank you so much for sharing your experiences. You know, people out there, this isn't just a political stance. I mean, it's a reality for a lot of people. Whether you're, black or Hispanic, or I mean, you figure in history, it wasn't too long ago that even my people, the Irish, were really discriminated against. And
Mhm.
they were white. So, discrimination doesn't judge.
Mhm.
It's got long arms and it reaches far and wide. Um, David, I'm gonna let you top off this episode with your questions because again, you've been patient sitting there, and I know you've got a lot of really fun stuff to ask.
Yeah, so if you've got a minute, I found an interview that you did for the George Fox Alumni Situation or
Mhm.
Association, and I wanted to ask you some follow-up questions about that. You had mentioned in that interview that part of the reason you got into historic preservation is because you were your family historian, and I was wondering if you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I was that kid who was always around, older people asking them about their life. And I remember things so different than my siblings. It's like, where did you get that from? But I just remember some of the stories, and I can spend hours researching my family background because, I have Irish and my grandmother's maiden name was O'Brien, uh and
Yay.
and I know and and we have German and African. I can go back as far as 1849 with and I'm sure that in Georgia where there was probably enslaved, Africans. And so yeah, I just love it. I took a course, um, didn't really have a lot of time to spend. I didn't realize how deep this course was, but I learned a lot. I wasn't there for the grade, but I didn't get a good one. But I learned so much. I really started to I just love learning about well, family history because history becomes alive for me. In school I just couldn't get it until I started to do oral histories and then recognizing that my father was a World War II veteran and that made history come alive because you start to personalize it and humanize it. To me, it just in high school it was just facts, that I couldn't really relate to. But now, and so now I get I love connecting our history to built places. And so with my family history in Pennsylvania, little Williamsport, Pennsylvania, we're having Little League World Series. We used to go every year, but I really want to go back now and say, oh, so this is where my grandmother and grandfather lived, um, and and kind of connecting oral history to the built history and places and spaces and really trying to understand what life was like for for African Americans in Oregon, Ohio.
Well, thank you. Um, and to me, that seems like it sort of ties into the recent living history project that OBP was doing at the High Desert Museum. Just doing that, like you said, that oral history, and then, tying that to names and people through performance.
Yes, I'm not familiar with that, but
Oh,
but I but I'm familiar with other oral history projects
sure.
and living history is really another way to interpret and bring history alive for our children. For I think there's a lot of different ways than just the written form,
Mhm.
and we also had like bus tours with Oregon Black Pioneers where we would take people from different counties and stop at different locations and we'll have a person there who was an expert on that history, share that information, and wrote an article about the power of being there.
Mm.
Just and so and now we have kind of moved into the walking tours where they will, go to different sites and talk about what happened in that place and because you know we pass these buildings every day, don't realize the significant history because they're not very decorative
Right.
or they wasn't commissioned by a famous person or famous politician. So these little humble dwellings that are at risk of being torn down had significant history. Um, and so I'm so happy that we're beginning to recognize these special places where the culture made it significant more than the architectural
Right.
features. But
Because it
yeah,
is more about the people than the building.
right,
That's what creates a
exactly.
place. Uh, kind of
Yeah,
kind of on that topic, you mentioned in that article that you had a long-term goal of getting 5 places on the National Register of Historic Places. And I was wondering if that was kind of a general number at that time, or if you had 5 specific places.
I think I was probably referencing the project that I was working on. And they they are now nominated as a historic. It was the Golden West Hotel, which is a
Yeah.
beautiful hotel on on Broadway and Everett. Then we have Dean's Beauty and Barber Salon that's now um, nominated. Mount Olivet, my former church, is now nominated as historic landmark. Not the original church, but the church that they built on First and Schuyler. And trying to think, oh, Billy Well, Eckline is now a historic landmark. And we recently um, nominated and successfully nominated the John D. Marshall Building, which was the headquarters of one of the early Black doctors and also the home of the Black Panthers Dental Clinic and and for a little while the medical clinic. Um, and so a lot of that is happening, had
Yeah.
happened. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm so grateful to be a part of that. And recently
Mhm.
was part of multiple property documentation for properties located. out in Oregon, but outside of Portland. So you're looking at some of the rural history, and that was successfully nominated and approved by the National Park Service in
Nice.
I think 2023. And so that will be an umbrella document for those who want to nominate individual properties um, significant to African American history.
Absolutely. Now, are there any properties that you kind of have in the works right now for nominations that you can talk about?
Not at this time. Um, there are some properties, but and the Oregon Black Pioneers is going to be involved in working with those as well as the city of Portland. But,
Yeah. And my final question is that you were trained and educated as an urban planner. My first question was what sparked your interest in urban planning, and then how and if those skills translate to your current work with the OBP.
yeah, absolutely. I in undergrad I received a BA in urban studies and administration, but I had a girlfriend who worked in the urban planning department, and she seemed to be have more tangible, work. Urban studies is a social science. You know,
It's
I just
very,
didn't really
yeah,
know.
very
But
abstract.
her, her urban planning studio, they would do making these cool projects and and so when I went, I always admired that. And so when I was working on it, moved to Oregon and got accepted into a PhD program. It was the first cohort of a public administration program. I really I felt like a master's degree would be more practical. And I just couldn't see myself as a professor. And I was a little intimidated. I was really young, in a cohort of older students, and I think they were intimidated by the younger folks as well. But so I said, oh, let me go get a master's degree. And so I really felt like it really hit home for me in the urban planning program because my parents were very involved in community planning. They work with the city to build our playground. Um, and and so I just had that spirit of community involvement. I was involved in like the Mount Pleasant community center, and we had like little bike parades, brigades, and we would decorate our bikes and participate in these parades. So it was very community oriented, and so that's what originally drew me into urban planning because I thought it had, especially community planning. And I was also inspired by a guy named Norman Crumholtz, who was really
Oh,
like
yes.
yeah, I was inspired by him. He was from Cleveland and but I, and so yeah, it really was my parents and a combination of how I grew up in Cleveland. We had such a strong neighborhood, you know.
Wow. And do you find that those skills translate to your work with OBP? Like you mentioned the work of being very community oriented and sort of plugging into those communities to get those stories.
Oh, absolutely. The community engagement,
Hmm.
respecting your elders, you learn a lot about, um, and even in some practical levels too, we're beginning to look for places for a museum. And so just as an urban planner, you also learn how to do, development and, like how to staff the permit center. So I know a little about everything. And
Yes.
so it's really been playing out well in terms of finding out about the zoning and if a museum is allowed and knowing who to talk to,
Yeah.
you know. And so that has helped. But a lot of the my as a because I was my most of my planning career was focused on long range planning, and so that's a lot of community engagement. And we did numerous workshops and So that really plays out a lot. And that's why I have a, my strong desire that if we ever have a museum, I want it to be go beyond just the Oregon Black pioneers,
Mhm.
but that it's going to be embraced by the, by the community, you know, and not just a project on our, of the Oregon Black pioneers, but it has to be, for me, to be successful, it has to be, have ownership, community
Mhm.
ownership.
Yes.
Well, for what it's worth, I'm sure I can speak for the entire network by saying you have our support.
Say that last, say that
I
again.
I I was gonna say, I'm sure I can speak for the entire network by saying that you definitely have our support in that endeavor.
Oh, thank you. You guys remember this because I will be coming back.
Yes,
Right
I'm
on.
glad to hear that because I have so many more follow-up questions and we just don't have time for it.
No,
Yeah,
um,
but I do suggest, our staff is doing some amazing things around the state and to bring them back and Zachary Stock and our program manager Mariah Walker are just doing really elevating um, the Oregon Black history and in very creative and innovative ways.
well, yeah, like we said, there's so much more to talk about, but unfortunately, we're running short on time. So I'll cap this off with one last question, and that is simply, what can we do to help further this amazing mission, this project?
I think you're doing, you're exactly what you're doing. I love that you have incorporated Black history early in your podcast series. That's great.
Yay!
And yeah, and there's so much to learn and grow. We're still learning every day about some of our stories, and I think if you continue to just work with different groups who are trying to create a more inclusive narrative about our Oregon's history, I think you know that would be amazing. And and also maybe promoting and marketing Oregon Black pioneers.
Well, well, and
I'm gonna
likewise,
be selfish.
we're small. No, I mean, likewise, we're small now. The only reason we have people on here is so they can tell everyone else, all their followers and everyone else involved, the glory of us.
Yeah.
It's very much a self-indulging kind of thing. No, it's all about networking and building friendships and relationships and all this other stuff. And yeah, to a degree, we kind of do have to be a little selfish and be like, hey, whoever please plug what we're doing, because in return, I talked about this early on that when I started Welcome to Oregon 2 years ago, I did have in mind where I wanted to do this big community of connectivity. I wanted to connect all of our colleagues, all of these fields of academics and stuff together, but it is a monumental task, and I didn't really know how to do it. I just had guesses, and things have evolved as we've gone forward, and ultimately, this show is the best way and easiest way to achieve the goal because we're going to be having so many people on as guests, and, their followers are going to look at their episode and go, wait a minute, there's other people here that I might like to look into. And so everything is shared and spread out. And I got really excited when I started realizing this. And so, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, that's exciting. I think it's a great format to elevate, the truth and I just think it's amazing
Well, thank you so
Right
tool.
much.
on. Thanks, Kimberly.
Thank you
This
Before
is
so much,
super awesome.
Kimberly.
Before I close the door on this, do you guys have any other like immediate, absolute pressing questions or anything you need to share or say?
No, I
I,
think we've about covered it,
yeah, I think we're
at
good.
least for today.
Yeah,
Yes, at least for
we'll
today.
start a list for next time.
Yes.
And David, I would love to learn more about that archaeology uh,
Certainly.
event.
Yes.
I would love
Yeah,
to go there.
absolutely. I'll get your contact information from Marcus and share everything I can. It'll be
Uh,
easy since the two Kimberlys here already know each other.
yeah, tell us said hello.
I
But
will.
yes,
Alrighty, guys. Thank you so much for joining
thank
us.
you.
Yeah.
Thank
This
you.
this episode
Truly,
was brought to you by the Oregon Voices Network, a historical podcast network that brings you amazing shows like Welcome to Oregon, a Oregon history and lore podcast, Offbeat Oregon, and the Penny Dreadful Story Hour. Suppose you want to be part of the conversation. In that case, we do have a Facebook group that you can check out for the Oregon Voices Network, where you'll find us and many of the guests we have on the show. And if you love our work, you should seriously consider donating to our Patreon at patreon.com/Oregon Voices Network. The money goes towards all of our projects and helps us pay for things like software, assets, and more. If you are listening to the audio version of the show, you can find more of our work on YouTube at youtube.com/Oregon Voices Network. Alrighty, this is where everybody gets to plug their stuff, starting with David.
Well, I am on most social media platforms at the Spirit of PDX.
Is it my turn?
Yes.
Yes.
Alphabetical order, Finn, come on.
Yes, indeed. Yeah, Finn at pulp-lit.com gets to me. And I'm on Facebook too, so you can like at me there if you want to, but I've been trying to quit.
Yeah.
Talking about Facebook like it's cigarettes.
Yeah, yeah.
It kind of is. It's way too tempting to argue with uneducated people, to put it kindly.
Wow.
I don't like to be
Well,
disparaging.
everyone is striking a pose, and right now the wheels are falling off of some things that people have invested heavily in, and so they are not in a very generous space right now. And that's all I'm going to say about that. So
Well,
yeah, trying to quit.
I will say, while we're on the subject real quick, that is something I had thought of because, currently I use Wix as the website builder, and it offers a way to create your own social media platform. And that is something I've seriously considered when redoing the website is, maybe building our own space where people can sign up, with memberships and just come and talk and enjoy. I mean, obviously still be on like Facebook and stuff, but
Sure.
kind of start building our own separate that we can kind of moderate and kind of keep out all the bad stuff and
In
keep
the
everything clean and
meantime,
focused.
we can talk about that between the three of us later.
Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So, Kimberly, why don't you go ahead and tell us where, like all the plugs, all the wonderful plugs, the
yeah.
work and where people can find you and stuff.
Check out Oregon Black Pioneers at www.oregonblackpioneers.org. And you can to learn more about Moreland Resource Consulting. I have a website too at www.morelandresource.com. And look forward to um, you guys joining us on some of the Oregon Black Pioneers events and walking tours this summer. We're going to have several. So come join us.
That would be lovely. Thank you,
Um,
Kimberly.
Thank you.
Yay.
So
All
should I
right.
sign off now? Or
I think
Well,
that's
well,
us.
well, I was
Yeah.
gonna say thanks for listening, thanks for watching from myself and the crew. Later.
cheers.
Bye, everyone.